when desperate widower Jacob Hartwell hired Catherine Mills as just a cook for his 4 grieving children on his Wyoming ranch in 1867. Neither expected that burned breakfast and bedtime stories would transform them into something far more precious than employer and employee. But what happens when a custody battle threatens to tear apart the family they never planned to become? The morning sun blazed like fire across the Wyoming territory as Jacob Hartwell stood frozen on his porch, watching black smoke pour from his kitchen window. September 1867 had brought nothing but trouble to the Broken Arrow Ranch, and today looked ready to add more fuel to the flames. "Papa! Papa!" 7-year-old Emma burst through the screen door, her blonde braids flying and tears streaming down her soot-covered cheeks. "The bacon caught fire, and I can't make it stop." Behind her came the wailing of baby Luke, the crash of falling pots, and the desperate voices of his 3 other children calling for help. Jacob's boots thundered across the wooden porch as he rushed inside, grabbing a bucket of water from beside the stove. The kitchen looked like a battlefield. Burned bacon lay scattered across the floor, eggs had exploded all over the wall, and 10-year-old Ben stood in the corner holding 18-month-old Luke, both of them crying. 12-year-old Sam sat at the table with his head in his hands, looking defeated. "I tried, Papa," Emma sobbed. "I really tried to make breakfast like Mama used to." Jacob's heart cracked a little more. 6 months since consumption had taken his beloved Mary, and his children were still trying to fill the empty spaces she'd left behind. They were drowning in grief and responsibility, and he felt helpless to save them. "It's not your fault, sweetheart," he said gently, pulling Emma into a hug despite the ash on her dress. "You're just 7 years old. Making breakfast isn't your job." "But someone has to do it," Sam said without looking up. "The hands need food before they start work, and we can't keep eating burned everything." Jacob surveyed the disaster around him. For months, he'd been trying to manage both the ranch and his children's needs. The cattle operation was thriving, beef prices were higher than ever, and his 100 head of longhorns were fat and healthy. But inside this house, chaos ruled every morning. "Maybe we should ask Mrs. Henderson from town to help again," Ben suggested, shifting baby Luke to his other hip. "She said she was too busy," Emma reminded him, and Mrs. Cooper said 4 children were too much work for one woman. Jacob felt the familiar weight of failure settling on his shoulders. 3 different women had tried to help with the children over the past months. Each one had lasted less than 2 weeks before deciding the Hartwell household was too much trouble. "Look," he said, trying to sound confident, "I'll ride into Cheyenne today and post another notice. Someone will answer. Someone who understands that children need patience and care, not just someone looking for easy work." "What if nobody comes?" Emma asked, her blue eyes wide with worry. Before Jacob could answer, the sound of approaching hoofbeats drew his attention to the window. A lone rider was coming up the dirt road that led to their ranch, sitting straight in the saddle despite the dusty journey. Even from a distance, he could see it was a woman. "Well," he said, hope creeping into his voice for the first time in weeks, "maybe somebody already has." The children crowded around the window, watching as the stranger guided her bay mare toward their house. She wore a simple brown dress and a practical hat, and something about the way she rode suggested she was comfortable with hard work. "Do you think she's here about the job?" Sam asked, suddenly looking more alert. "Only one way to find out," Jacob replied, stepping onto the porch as the woman dismounted. She was older than he'd expected, probably around 30, with auburn hair pulled back neatly and hands that showed she wasn't afraid of work. Her green eyes took in the smoke still drifting from the kitchen window, the children's worried faces pressed against the glass, and Jacob's soot-stained clothes. "Mr. Hartwell?" she asked, her voice steady and clear. "I'm Catherine Mills. I came about the position you advertised in the Cheyenne newspaper." Jacob felt a spark of hope. Unlike the other women who'd applied, Catherine Mills didn't look shocked by the chaos around her. Instead, she seemed to be studying the situation like she was solving a puzzle. "Can you cook?" he asked directly, gesturing toward the disaster behind him. "I can cook, clean, manage a household, and handle children," she replied. Then baby Luke let out another wail from inside, and she added, and it sounds like you need all of those skills right now. When could you start? Jacob found himself asking, even though he hadn't interviewed her properly yet. Catherine was already removing her riding gloves and rolling up her sleeves. Right now, if you'd like. But I should warn you about something first, Mr. Hartwell. I don't believe in just keeping children fed and clean. I believe they need structure, rules, and someone who cares enough to enforce both. Something in her tone made Jacob pause. His children had been through so much already. They've had enough hardship, Miss Mills. They don't need someone making their lives harder. Catherine stopped at the bottom of the porch steps and looked him straight in the eye. Mr. Hartwell, there's a big difference between hardship and boundaries. Right now, your children are drowning in chaos. Kindness without guidance won't save them from that. As if her words had summoned proof, Emma appeared in the doorway again, this time with flour in her hair and a look of complete defeat on her small face. Behind her, the sound of Luke's crying mixed with the smell of burned food and disaster. Sometimes, Catherine said quietly, watching Emma's shoulders shake with silent sobs, the kindest thing you can do for someone is teach them how to swim instead of just throwing them a rope. Jacob looked at his daughter, then at this strange woman who seemed to understand something he'd been missing. Maybe what his children needed wasn't someone to replace their mother, but someone to help them find their footing in this new world they were all trying to navigate. 3 weeks later, the Hartwell house hummed with a rhythm Jacob had forgotten was possible. The smell of fresh biscuits drifted from the kitchen, the children's laughter echoed through the hallways, and for the first time since Mary's death, Jacob could focus on ranch work without wondering what disaster awaited him at home. But it was the small changes that caught him off guard the most. Miss Catherine, will you show me how to make the gravy thick like you do? Emma asked one crisp October morning, standing on a wooden stool beside the stove. Of course, but first tell me what your morning chores are, Catherine replied, stirring the pot with practiced ease. Feed the chickens, collect the eggs, and help get Luke dressed for breakfast, Emma recited proudly. And Sam has to milk Bessie. Ben has to gather firewood, and Luke has to put his toys in the basket before meals. Even baby Luke has chores? Jacob asked from the doorway, surprised. Age, appropriate responsibilities, Catherine corrected with a smile. He's learning that everyone in a family contributes something, even if it's small. Jacob watched as Emma carefully measured flour into the gravy, her tongue sticking out in concentration. 3 weeks ago, she'd been crying over burned bacon. Now she was learning to cook with confidence and joy. Mama used to let me help in the kitchen too, Emma said quietly, then looked up at Catherine with worried eyes. Is it okay to remember her while I'm learning new things? Catherine's stirring slowed for just a moment. Sweetheart, remembering your mama isn't something you need permission for. Love doesn't end when someone goes to heaven. It just finds new ways to show itself. Like how Papa still tells us her bedtime stories, Ben asked, appearing with an armload of firewood. Exactly like that, Catherine agreed. And like how you boys take care of your sister and baby brother the way she taught you to. From his spot in the doorway, Jacob felt something tight in his chest loosen. He'd been so afraid that healing meant forgetting Mary, but Catherine was teaching his children something he'd lost sight of, that honoring the past and building the future could happen at the same time. Miss Catherine? Sam's voice carried from the barn. The new calf is here. The kitchen erupted in excitement as all 4 children rushed outside, with Catherine following close behind. Jacob trailed after them, curious to see how she'd handle this new adventure. The barn was filled with golden morning light, and there in the corner stall stood Gertie, their prize cow, with a wobbly-legged calf beside her. The children pressed against the stall door, whispering in amazement. Can we name him? Emma asked. What should we call him? Ben wondered. How about Trouble? Sam suggested with a grin. Since he was born right when we were getting breakfast ready. That's perfect, Catherine laughed, and very fitting for this household. As they watched the calf take its first unsteady steps, Jacob noticed how naturally Catherine had become part of these moments. She wasn't trying to replace Mary or pretend the children's grief didn't exist. Instead, she was helping them create new memories while honoring the old ones. Miss Catherine, Emma said suddenly, do you have children of your own? The question hung in the morning air, and Jacob saw something flicker across Catherine's fascia, shadow of old pain quickly hidden. "No, sweetheart," she said gently, "but I've always believed that some people are meant to nurture and care for others. That's what makes me happy." "Were you married before?" Ben asked with the innocent curiosity of childhood. "I was," Catherine replied simply. "But sometimes life takes unexpected turns, and we have to find new ways to build the family we're meant to have." Jacob found himself studying Catherine's profile as she spoke. In 3 weeks, she'd become more than just hired help. She'd become the steady heartbeat that kept his household running, the gentle voice that soothed nightmares, and the firm hand that guided his children toward independence and confidence. "What about you, Miss Catherine?" Emma asked. "Are we your family now?" Catherine was quiet for a long moment, watching the calf nuzzle against its mother. "I'd like that very much," she said finally, "if that's what you'd like too." "We would," all 4 children said, almost in unison, then looked at each other and giggled. That evening, after the children were tucked into bed and the ranch hands had finished their dinner, Jacob found Catherine on the front porch, mending one of Sam's torn shirts by lamplight. "You don't have to do that," he said, settling into the chair beside her. "Mending clothes wasn't part of what we discussed." "Neither was becoming part of the family," Catherine replied with a soft smile. "But some things just happen naturally." "Catherine," Jacob said carefully, "what you said this morning about life taking unexpected turns." "My husband died 3 years ago," she said quietly, her needle never pausing. "We lost our baby the same winter. Fever took them both within a week of each other." Jacob felt his chest tighten with sympathy. "I'm sorry. I didn't know." "How could you?" Catherine replied. "But I want you to understand something, Jacob. I didn't come here looking to replace what I lost. I came here because I heard children who needed someone to care about them, and a man who was trying to hold everything together on his own. And now—" Catherine looked up from her mending, her green eyes reflecting the lamplight. "Now I've found something I didn't know I was looking for. A second chance at the kind of family I thought was gone forever." The night air was cool and filled with the sound of crickets and distant cattle. Jacob watched Catherine's careful stitches and realized that she was mending more than just torn fabric. She was weaving herself into the very foundation of their lives. But as content as this moment felt, Jacob couldn't shake the feeling that their newfound peace was fragile. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, and he could only hope that the foundation they were building together would be strong enough to weather whatever storms lay ahead. Blood dripped from 12-year-old Sam's knuckles as he stumbled through the front door, his shirt torn and his left eye already swelling shut. Catherine looked up from where she was teaching Emma to embroider and immediately set down her needle. "Kitchen, now." Her voice was calm but firm, the kind of tone that didn't allow for argument. Sam's jaw tightened. "You're not my mother. You can't tell me what to do." "No, I'm not your mother," Catherine agreed, standing slowly. "But I'm the adult in this house who's going to clean those cuts and find out why you're hurting other people because you're hurting inside." Emma gasped at the sight of her brother's injuries, and baby Luke started to whimper from his spot on the floor. Ben appeared in the doorway, his eyes wide with worry. "What happened to Sam?" Ben asked. "That's what we're going to find out," Catherine said, guiding Sam toward the kitchen despite his resistance. "Emma, please take Luke to the parlor and read him a story. Ben, fetch me some clean cloth and the medicine bottle from the pantry." Sam slumped into a kitchen chair, his tough act crumbling now that he was away from his siblings' worried stares. Catherine began cleaning his wounds with gentle but efficient movements, her touch tender despite his earlier rudeness. "Tell me about the fight," she said quietly. "Why do you care?" Sam muttered, but there was more pain than anger in his voice now. "Because you're bleeding in my kitchen, and because something made you angry enough to use your fists instead of your words." Catherine dabbed at a particularly deep cut on his knuckle. "And because I've seen that look in your eyes before, like you're carrying a weight that's too heavy for one person." Sam was quiet for a long moment, watching Catherine work. Finally, he said, "Billy Morrison said our family was falling apart. He said Papa was probably going to send us away because he couldn't handle us anymore." Catherine's hand stilled. "And what did you say to that?" "I didn't say anything. I hit him." Sam's voice dropped to barely a whisper. But what if he's right, Miss Catherine? What if Papa decides we're too much trouble? What if you decide we're too much trouble? Outside, storm clouds were gathering, and Catherine could hear Jacob's boots on the porch. She had maybe 30 seconds before he walked in and saw his son's battered face, and she knew her response would shape not just this moment, but possibly the entire family's future. "Sam," she said, looking directly into his good eye, "let me tell you something about families. Some are born together and some are chosen. But the strongest families are the ones that choose each other every single day, even when things get hard." The door opened, and Jacob stepped inside, shaking rain from his hat. His eyes immediately found Sam's injuries, and his face went pale. "What happened?" he asked, his voice tight with concern. Catherine looked at Sam, then at Jacob. "We're working through it, aren't we, Sam?" For the first time since he'd walked in, Sam nodded. "Yes, ma'am." Jacob approached slowly, studying his son's face. "Son, fighting isn't the answer to whatever's troubling you." "I know, Papa," Sam said. "Miss Catherine already explained that." "Good." Jacob pulled up another chair. "Now, want to tell me what this was really about?" Sam's story came out in pieces. Billy Morrison's cruel words, the fear that had been eating at him for weeks, the worry that their family was too broken to stay together. As he talked, Catherine continued tending his wounds, and Jacob listened with the kind of patience that only came from understanding pain. "Sam," Jacob said when his son finished, "do you remember what I told you boys the day after your mama died?" "That we'd stick together no matter what," Sam replied. "That's right. And has anything changed about that promise?" Sam glanced at Catherine, then back at his father. "No, sir." "Then why would you think I'd send you away?" "Because we're so much work, and we mess things up, and you're my children," Jacob interrupted gently. "You're not work, Sam. You're the reason I get up every morning and the reason I work so hard to keep this ranch running. You and your brothers and sister are the most important thing in my life." Catherine finished bandaging Sam's knuckles and stepped back, but she stayed close enough to offer support. "Your father's right, Sam. Families aren't perfect. They're messy and loud, and sometimes they fight. But real families stick together through all of that." "Even when kids get in trouble?" Sam asked. "Especially then," Catherine and Jacob said at the same time, then looked at each other in surprise. Sam almost smiled. "You two sound like a real family already." That evening, after Sam had apologized to his siblings for scaring them and promised to use his words instead of his fists, Catherine found herself alone with Jacob on the front porch. The storm had passed, leaving the air clean and cool. "Thank you," Jacob said, "for handling that so well, for knowing exactly what he needed to hear." "He's a good boy," Catherine replied. "He's just carrying fears that are too big for a 12-year-old. We all are, I think." Jacob was quiet for a moment. "Catherine, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "When you told Sam that families choose each other every day, did you mean that?" Catherine looked at him, seeing something vulnerable in his expression. "Yes, I meant it." "Why?" "Because I've been thinking about choices a lot lately. About the choice you made to stay when things got difficult. About the choice the children made to trust you. About the choice I made to let you into our lives. And," Jacob turned to face her fully, "I'm wondering if you'd be willing to make another choice. A bigger one." Before Catherine could ask what he meant, Emma's voice called from inside the house. "Miss Catherine, Luke's awake and he's asking for you." As Catherine hurried inside to tend to the baby, Jacob remained on the porch, watching through the window as she scooped Luke into her arms and began singing a soft lullaby. The sight filled him with a warmth he hadn't felt since Mary's death, and also with a fear he hadn't expected. What if Catherine decided that this life, this family, this responsibility was too much? What if she chose to leave? But as he watched her gentle care for his son, Jacob realized that the bigger question wasn't whether Catherine would choose to stay. The bigger question was whether he was brave enough to ask her to choose forever. The knock on the door came at exactly 10 o'clock on a Tuesday morning in late October, delivered by a man whose expensive suit and cold eyes immediately made Jacob's stomach clench with dread. The stranger stood stiffly on the porch, his polished shoes already dusty from the short walk from his carriage. "Mr. Hartwell?" The man's voice was crisp, professional, and completely out of place on a working ranch. "I'm Harold Pemberton, attorney at law from Boston. I represent Mrs. Adelaide Brennan regarding the custody of your children." Jacob felt the blood drain from his face. Mary's sister Adelaide, woman who had opposed their marriage from the beginning, who had called him an unsuitable cowboy, and predicted their union would end in disaster. "What does Adelaide want?" Jacob asked, though he already suspected the answer would shatter his world. "May I come in? This is a delicate matter that requires privacy." Against his better judgment, Jacob led the lawyer into the parlor, where the sounds of normal family life drifted from the kitchen, Catherine helping Emma with her arithmetic, baby Luke babbling happily, and the boys discussing their afternoon chores. Pemberton settled into Mary's favorite chair and opened his leather satchel. "Mrs. Brennan has been following the situation here with great concern. A single father attempting to raise 4 children with only a hired cook for assistance is hardly ideal for proper child development. Those children are loved and cared for," Jacob said firmly. "They're thriving. Love is admirable, Mr. Hartwell, but it doesn't provide education, refinement, or social advantages." Pemberton pulled out a thick document. "Mrs. Brennan can offer these children opportunities. You simply cannot private tutors, cultural enrichment, preparation for respectable careers." "She can offer them a prison," Jacob countered. "These children need freedom, fresh air, and the chance to be children. They need structure and guidance from someone qualified to provide it." Pemberton's eyes glanced toward the kitchen. "I understand your current domestic help has become quite attached to the family. But emotional attachment is no substitute for proper breeding and education." From the kitchen doorway, Catherine had been listening to every word, her hands gripping a dish towel so tightly her knuckles were white. She'd heard Adelaide's name whispered in the children's bedtime stories, the stern aunt from Boston who had sent exactly 1 letter after Mary's death, expressing her concerns about the children's welfare. "What exactly is Mrs. Brennan proposing?" Jacob asked, though his voice suggested he already knew. "She is prepared to take custody of all 4 children and raise them in Boston, where they can receive proper schooling and social training. She has the financial means to provide everything they need." "Everything except love," Jacob said. "Love doesn't guarantee a successful future, Mr. Hartwell. Education and opportunity do." Catherine couldn't stay silent any longer. She stepped into the parlor, still holding the dish towel, her green eyes blazing with quiet fury. "And what about what the children want?" she asked. "Have you bothered to ask them their opinion about being torn away from their home and their father?" Pemberton looked at her with obvious disdain. "Children are not qualified to make such important decisions about their own welfare. That responsibility falls to the adults who understand what's best for them." "I understand what's best for them," Catherine said firmly. "Security, stability, and adults who put their needs before social expectations." "Miss..." Pemberton paused, clearly not considering her worthy of formal address. "Mills," Catherine supplied coldly. "Catherine Mills." "Miss Mills, while your attachment to these children is touching, you are not a family member. You have no legal standing in this matter." Before Catherine could respond, Emma appeared in the doorway, her blue eyes wide with confusion and fear. "Papa? What's happening? Why is everyone talking so serious?" Jacob's heart broke as he saw his daughter's worried expression. How could he explain that someone wanted to take her away from everything she knew and loved? "It's adult business, sweetheart," he said gently. "Why don't you go help Miss Catherine with Luke?" But Emma was too smart to be easily dismissed. "Is someone trying to take us away?" The question hung in the air like a thunderclap. Pemberton cleared his throat uncomfortably, while Jacob struggled to find words that wouldn't terrify his daughter. "No one is taking you anywhere without a fight," Catherine said firmly, kneeling down to Emma's eye level. "Your papa loves you, and so do I. We're going to make sure you stay where you belong." "But what if..." Emma began. "No what-ifs," Catherine interrupted gently. "Just trust that the adults who love you are going to protect you." Pemberton stood abruptly. "Mr. Hartwell, Mrs. Brennan is prepared to pursue this matter through the courts if necessary. I suggest you consider what's truly best for these children's futures." I am considering it, Jacob replied, standing as well. And what's best for them is staying with their family. You have 6 weeks to reconsider, Pemberton said, heading toward the door. After that, Mrs. Brennan will file a formal petition for custody. After the lawyer left, Jacob sank into his chair, his head in his hands. Catherine sent Emma back to the kitchen with instructions to help Ben watch the baby, then knelt beside Jacob's chair. We won't let her take them, she said quietly. Catherine, you don't understand. Adelaide has money, lawyers, social connections. What do I have? A ranch and a reputation as a simple cowboy. You have 4 children who love you more than anything in the world. You have a community that respects you. And you have me. Jacob looked up at her, seeing the fierce determination in her eyes. Why? Why would you fight this battle with me? You could leave, find an easier position somewhere else. Catherine was quiet for a long moment, then said, Because 6 weeks ago, I was just someone looking for work. Now I'm someone who tucks these children into bed every night and listens to their prayers. I'm someone who knows that Sam likes his eggs over easy, and Ben prefers his stories about brave knights. I'm someone who sings lullabies to baby Luke and helps Emma with her letters. Catherine, I'm not finished, she said firmly. I'm also someone who's watched you work 16-hour days to provide for your family, then sit up all night when one of them has a nightmare. I've seen you teach Sam how to mend fences and show Ben how to gentle a skittish horse. I've watched you braid Emma's hair with the same careful attention your wife probably did. Jacob felt tears threatening. But is that enough? Against lawyers and money and social expectations? Catherine stood and walked to the window where she could see the children playing in the yard, Emma pushing Luke on the tire swing, while Sam and Ben practiced roping fence posts. Jacob, she said without turning around, sometimes the most important battles aren't won with money or lawyers. They're won with truth. And the truth is that those children belong here, with you, in this life you've built together. And if we lose... Catherine finally turned to face him, and Jacob saw something in her expression that he'd never seen before, not just determination, but love. Deep, fierce, protective love for his children and, he suspected, for him. Then we make sure we don't lose, she said simply, because some things are worth fighting for, no matter what the odds. Emma's fever burned like fire when Catherine pressed her palm against the 7-year-old's forehead at dawn on November 1st. Within an hour, Ben was shivering under 3 blankets despite the sweat pouring down his face, and by noon, baby Luke's pitiful whimpers had turned into the kind of cries that made Catherine's heart race with fear. It's scarlet fever, Dr. Morrison confirmed after examining all 4 children in their beds, going around the territory this fall. Could be mild, could be. He didn't finish the sentence, but his grim expression said everything. Jacob stood in the hallway, his face pale as winter snow. What do we do? Keep them cool when the fever spikes, warm when they get chills, plenty of water, even if they don't want it. And you'll need to quarantine the house, nobody in or out, for at least 2 weeks. The doctor packed his bag slowly, his movements heavy with the weight of experience. I'll check back when I can, but I've got 6 other families dealing with this same thing. As Dr. Morrison's buggy disappeared down the road, Catherine was already rolling up her sleeves and organizing supplies. She'd moved the children to the 2 largest bedrooms upstairs, with Emma and Luke in one room and Sam and Ben in the other. Catherine, Jacob said quietly, catching her arm as she headed toward the stairs with fresh linens, you don't have to stay. You could go to town until this passes. It's not your... Don't. Her voice was sharp as broken glass. Don't you dare tell me these children aren't my responsibility. Don't you dare suggest I would abandon them when they need me most. But if you get sick, then I get sick. But I'm not leaving them, Jacob. I'm not leaving any of you. The first night was the longest of Catherine's life. She moved between the 2 rooms like a ghost, cooling fevered foreheads with damp cloths, coaxing sips of water past cracked lips, and singing soft lullabies when the fever dreams became too frightening. Emma was the sickest, her small body burning with heat that seemed to come from somewhere deep inside. She thrashed in her sleep, calling for her mother with a voice so weak it barely carried across the room. Mama, she whispered around midnight, her eyes unfocused but searching. "Mama, where are you?" Catherine's heart broke as she knelt beside the bed. "I'm here, sweetheart. I'm right here." "It hurts, Mama. Everything hurts." Catherine smoothed the child's sweat-soaked hair away from her face. "I know, baby. I know it hurts. But you're going to get better. You're going to be fine." From the doorway, Jacob watched the scene with tears burning his eyes. Catherine had been awake for nearly 20 hours straight, moving between the children with the kind of tireless devotion that came from pure love. "You should rest," he said softly. "I can sit with them for a while." "Can't rest," Catherine murmured, dipping the cloth in cool water again. "Emma's fever hasn't broken yet, and Luke keeps asking for water." "Catherine, please, Jacob, I need to be here. They need me to be here." The second day brought new terrors. Ben's fever spiked so high he began having convulsions, his small body shaking uncontrollably while Catherine held him, and Jacob rode like lightning to fetch Dr. Morrison. Sam, who had seemed to be improving, suddenly took a turn for the worse, his breathing becoming shallow and labored. But it was baby Luke who scared Catherine the most. At 18 months old, he didn't understand why he felt so terrible or why the adults around him looked so worried. He cried constantly, a weak, pitiful sound that seemed to echo through the house like a warning bell. "Mama cat," he whimpered when Catherine picked him up, his chubby arms wrapping around her neck with desperate strength. "Mama cat, make it stop." The nickname hit Catherine like a physical blow. Luke had never called her anything but Miss Catherine before, but in his fever and confusion, he'd created something new, something that sounded achingly like family. "I'm trying, sweetheart," she whispered, rocking him gently. "Mama cat is trying to make it all better." On the third night, Sam's condition worsened dramatically. His fever climbed so high that he became delirious, thrashing in his bed and calling out for people who weren't there. "Mama!" he cried, his voice hoarse from fever. "Mama, don't leave me! Please don't leave me!" Catherine rushed to his side, her own exhaustion forgotten in the face of his panic. "I'm here, Sam. I'm right here with you." "Promise," he begged, his eyes wide but unfocused. "Promise, you won't leave me like Mama did." "I promise," Catherine said firmly, taking his burning hand in both of hers. "I promise I will never leave you. Never." "You swear?" "I swear on everything I hold dear. I will never, ever leave you." From the hallway, Jacob heard every word of Catherine's vow, and something deep in his chest shifted and settled. This wasn't just a woman caring for children she'd been hired to tend. This was a mother protecting her babies with the fierce devotion that came from a love deeper than blood. The fourth morning brought the first sign of hope. Baby Luke's fever broke just as the sun rose over the Wyoming mountains. Catherine wept with relief as she felt his forehead cool under her touch, his breathing finally steady and peaceful. Emma followed an hour later, then Ben by noon. But Sam, the strongest of them all, continued to burn with fever that seemed determined to consume him from the inside out. "Why isn't he getting better?" Catherine asked Dr. Morrison when he arrived for his evening check. "Sometimes it takes longer in older children," the doctor explained, but his expression was troubled. "His body is fighting hard, but the fever is stubborn." That night, Catherine didn't leave Sam's bedside. She sat in a chair, pulled close to his bed, one hand on his forehead and the other holding his fingers, whispering stories and promises and prayers into the darkness. "Tell me about the ranch," Sam mumbled during a brief moment of clarity around 3 a.m. "What do you want to know?" Catherine asked. "Will there still be calves in the spring? Will the cattle drive still happen? Will we still be here?" Catherine's throat tightened. Even in his illness, Sam was worrying about the future, about whether their family would survive Adelaide's threat. "There will be calves," she said firmly, "and cattle drives, and you'll be here to see all of it, because this is your home, and we're your family. Promise?" "I promise, my brave boy. I promise." As the first light of dawn touched the windows, Sam's fever finally broke. Catherine felt the change immediately, the terrible heat leaving his body like steam rising from summer rain. His breathing deepened, his color improved, and for the first time in 5 days, He slept peacefully. Jacob found Catherine still sitting beside Sam's bed, her head resting on her arms, finally allowing exhaustion to claim her. He covered her with a blanket and sat down in another chair to keep watch over both his son and the woman who had proven that love could indeed conquer fear. Outside, the November wind whispered through the bare trees, carrying with it the promise of winter and the hope of spring. Inside, a family that had been tested by illness had emerged stronger, bound together by trials that had revealed the true depth of their connection. But even as Jacob watched his children sleep safely, he knew their greatest test was still to come. The letter arrived on a crisp November morning, delivered by young Tommy Peterson from the post office in Cheyenne. Jacob's hands trembled as he broke the wax seal and unfolded the official document, but it was Catherine who spoke the words that had been haunting them all. "The hearing is set for December 15th, she said quietly, reading over his shoulder. "Judge Harrison's courtroom in Cheyenne. Just 3 weeks away. 3 weeks to prepare for a battle that could tear their family apart forever." "Papa?" Emma's voice drifted from the kitchen doorway, where she stood with her brothers clustered behind her. All 4 children had recovered from the scarlet fever, but they remained closer than usual, as if the illness had reminded them how precious their family truly was. "What's happening?" Sam asked, his sharp eyes taking in the official-looking paper and his father's pale face. Jacob folded the letter carefully, his mind racing. The children deserved to know what they were facing, but how could he explain that someone wanted to take them away from everything they loved? "There's going to be a hearing," he said finally. "A judge needs to decide where you children should live." "Can't we just tell him we want to stay here?" Ben asked, his practical mind cutting straight to the heart of the matter. "It's more complicated than that, son," Jacob replied. "Your Aunt Adelaide thinks you'd be better off living with her in Boston." Emma's face went white. "But we don't even know her. She never visited us, not even when Mama was sick." "She sent a letter," Sam pointed out, though his tone suggested what he thought of that single gesture. "One letter," Ben scoffed. "Miss Catherine sends us to our rooms when we don't write thank you notes, and Aunt Adelaide thinks one letter makes her family?" Catherine listened to the children's reactions with a mixture of pride and heartbreak. They understood the situation better than she'd expected, and their loyalty to their father and to her was absolute. But would that be enough to convince a judge? "There's something else," she said, looking at Jacob. "Something we need to discuss." That evening, after the children were asleep, Catherine and Jacob sat at the kitchen table with paper and ink, trying to figure out how to present their case. The lamp cast a warm circle of light around them, but the shadows in the corners seemed to whisper of uncertainty. "The judge will want to know about stability," Catherine said, making notes on a piece of paper. "About education, about proper influences for the children. Adelaide can offer them things I can't," Jacob admitted reluctantly. "Private tutors, cultural advantages, connections that could help them in life." "And what can you offer them that she can't?" Jacob was quiet for a long moment, staring at his calloused hands. "Love, understanding, the freedom to be themselves instead of what society expects them to be." "That's not nothing, Jacob. That's everything." "Is it enough, though, against lawyers and money and social expectations?" Before Catherine could answer, Emma appeared in the doorway in her nightgown, her blonde hair braided for bed. "I couldn't sleep," she said. "I keep thinking about the hearing." Catherine opened her arms, and Emma climbed onto her lap, settling against her chest like she belonged there. "Are you scared?" Catherine asked gently. "A little," Emma admitted. "But I've been thinking about something. Remember when I had the fever and I was so sick?" "Of course I remember. Aunt Adelaide wasn't here then. She didn't sit up all night putting cool cloths on my head or sing to me when I had bad dreams. You did that. You and Papa." Catherine's throat tightened. "Sweetheart." "And when Sam got in that fight, Aunt Adelaide didn't help him understand why he was so angry. You did that. And when baby Luke took his first steps, Aunt Adelaide wasn't here to see it and clap for him. You were." Jacob watched his daughter's earnest face, seeing wisdom beyond her 7 years. "What I'm trying to say," Emma continued, is that Aunt Adelaide might have money and a fancy house, but she doesn't have memories with us. She doesn't know that Sam likes his eggs over easy, or that Ben is afraid of spiders, or that I need you to braid my hair a special way so it doesn't tangle. Those things matter to you? Catherine asked. They matter most of all, Emma said firmly, because that's what makes someone family, knowing the little things that make each person special. After Emma went back to bed, Catherine and Jacob sat in thoughtful silence. Finally, Catherine spoke. Jacob, I have an idea, but you might not like it. Tell me, what if we let the children speak for themselves? What if they wrote letters to the judge, telling him exactly what Emma just told us? Jacob considered this. You think a judge would listen to children? I think a judge would have to listen to children when the decision affects their entire lives. And I think our children are smart enough and brave enough to speak their own truth. The next morning, Catherine gathered all 4 children around the kitchen table with paper and pencils. We're going to write letters to the judge, she explained. You're going to tell him, in your own words, what you want and why. What should we say? Ben asked. Whatever is in your hearts, Catherine replied. Whatever you think the judge needs to know about your family and where you belong. For the next hour, the kitchen was filled with the scratch of pencils on paper and the quiet murmur of children thinking out loud. Catherine helped Luke make marks on his paper, telling him they represented his love for his family. When they finished, Catherine read each letter aloud. Emma had written about the difference between a house and a home. Sam had explained why a father's love was more valuable than any amount of money. Ben had listed all the things he'd learned on the ranch that no city school could teach him. And Luke's paper, covered with scribbles and a few recognizable letters, somehow conveyed more love than words could express. These are perfect, Catherine said, her voice thick with emotion. These letters show exactly who you are and what this family means to you. Do you really think they'll help? Sam asked. I think, Catherine said, looking around the table at these 4 brave children who had already endured so much, that truth always has power. And your truth is that you belong here, with your father, in this home you've all helped build together. That afternoon, as Catherine sealed the letters in an envelope addressed to Judge Harrison, she allowed herself a moment of hope. Adelaide might have lawyers and money and social connections, but they had something more powerful. They had love, and they had truth. And they had the unshakable bond of a family that had chosen each other through every trial. The question was, would it be enough? The courthouse in Cheyenne buzzed with whispered conversations and curious stares as Jacob Hartwell walked through the heavy wooden doors on December 15th, his 4 children beside him and Catherine close behind. Adelaide Brennan was already seated in the front row, her black silk dress elegant and severe, her gray hair pulled back in a style that spoke of money and social position. Remember what we talked about? Catherine whispered to the children as they found seats behind Jacob's table. Be honest, be respectful, and tell the truth about what's in your hearts. Judge Harrison entered the courtroom with the weight of authority, his weathered face giving no hint of what he might be thinking. He was a man in his 60s, known throughout the territory for being fair but stern, someone who didn't suffer fools or waste time on nonsense. This court is now in session, he announced, settling behind the bench. We're here to determine the custody of 4 minor children, Emma, Samuel, Benjamin, and Luke Hartwell. Mrs. Brennan, your attorney may present your case. Adelaide's lawyer, Mr. Pemberton, stood with confidence that came from years of winning difficult cases. Your Honor, we're here today because 4 innocent children are living in conditions that can only be described as inadequate. A single father running a cattle ranch, with only a woman of questionable background serving as their female influence. Catherine felt the sting of those words but kept her face calm. She'd expected this attack on her character. My client, Mrs. Adelaide Brennan, can provide these children with proper education, cultural refinement, and social advantages that will serve them throughout their lives. She owns a substantial home in Boston's finest neighborhood, has the financial means to hire the best tutors, and can introduce them to society in ways that a simple rancher never could. Pemberton walked toward the judge's bench, his voice growing stronger. Your Honor, while Mr. Hartwell's affection for his children is admirable, Love alone cannot provide what these children need to succeed in life. They require structure, discipline, and guidance from someone with the breeding and education to prepare them for respectable futures. And what about what the children themselves want? Jacob's voice cut through the courtroom. Your Honor, Pemberton replied smoothly, children are not qualified to make decisions about their own welfare. They lack the wisdom and experience to understand what's truly best for their futures. Judge Harrison nodded thoughtfully. Mr. Hartwell, you may present your case. Jacob stood slowly, his hands steady despite the weight of the moment. He wasn't a man comfortable with speeches, but he was fighting for his children's lives. Your Honor, I won't pretend I can offer my children the same material advantages as Mrs. Brennan. I'm a simple man who works with his hands and makes his living from the land. But I can offer them something. Money can't buy a father's love and the freedom to grow into whoever they're meant to become. Jacob's voice grew stronger as he continued. These children have already faced more hardship than most adults. They lost their mother, they survived a deadly fever, and they've learned to depend on each other and work together as a family. They don't need to be rescued from their lives. They need to be allowed to live them. Your Honor, Catherine stood, her voice clear and calm. May I speak? Judge Harrison looked surprised. You're not a legal party to this proceeding, Miss Mills. No, sir, but I am the woman who has cared for these children every day for the past 5 months. I've seen them grow and heal and learn to hope again after losing their mother. I've watched their father work from sunrise to sunset to provide for them, then sit up all night when they have nightmares. Your Honor, Pemberton objected, this woman is merely hired help. That woman, Emma's voice rang out clear and strong from the gallery, is our mama now. The courtroom fell completely silent. Emma stood up, her small frame trembling but her voice unwavering. Miss Catherine isn't just hired help. She's family. She stayed when we were sick with the fever. She teaches us things and helps us feel safe. She chose us. Before anyone could stop them, Sam stood beside his sister. We want to stay with Papa and Miss Catherine. They're our real family now. Ben rose next, followed by Jacob lifting baby Luke into his arms. All 4 children stood together, united in their determination. Judge Harrison studied the children's faces with interest. Mrs. Brennan, do you have anything to say to this? Adelaide stood slowly, and for the first time, her composed mask slipped. Catherine could see uncertainty in her eyes, and something that might have been pain. I loved my sister very much, Adelaide said, her voice softer than it had been all day. When I heard about these children living on a ranch with only their father and a hired woman to care for them, I thought I could give them what Margaret would have wanted for them. And what do you think your sister would have wanted? Judge Harrison asked gently. Adelaide looked at the children, really looked at them, for the first time since entering the courtroom. She saw Emma's fierce loyalty, Sam's protective stance, Ben's quiet strength, and baby Luke's trusting smile. She would have wanted them to be loved, Adelaide admitted quietly. She would have wanted them to be happy and safe and together. Your Honor, Catherine said, stepping forward, Mrs. Brennan is welcome to be part of these children's lives. Family doesn't have to mean custody. It can mean love and support and being there when you're needed. Adelaide's eyes met Catherine's across the courtroom, and something passed between them, understanding, perhaps, or at least the beginning of respect. Mrs. Brennan, Judge Harrison said, what is your response to Miss Mills' suggestion? Adelaide was quiet for a long moment, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. I want what's best for my nieces and nephews, she said finally. I thought that meant taking them away from what I saw as an unsuitable situation, but perhaps I was wrong about what unsuitable means. Emma spoke up again, her voice carrying clearly through the silent courtroom. Aunt Adelaide, you could visit us. We'd like to know you, but our home is with Papa and Mama Catherine. The word Mama hit Catherine like a physical blow, filling her with joy and terror at the same time. These children were claiming her publicly, officially, in front of a judge and a courtroom full of strangers. Your Honor, Jacob said, his voice hoarse with emotion, if I may, these children have spoken their hearts. They know what family means because they've lived it, lost it, and found it again. I'm asking you to let them keep what they've built." Judge Harrison was quiet for what felt like an eternity, studying the faces before him, the children clinging to each other, Jacob's quiet desperation, Catherine's fierce protectiveness, and Adelaide's dawning understanding. "This court will recess for 30 minutes while I consider all the testimony," he announced finally. "When we return, I'll give my decision." As the courtroom emptied, Catherine gathered the children close, while Jacob stepped outside for air. Adelaide approached hesitantly, her earlier confidence replaced by something more vulnerable. "Miss Mills," she said quietly, "I owe you an apology. I thought I was fighting for these children's welfare. I didn't realize I was fighting against their happiness." Catherine looked at this woman, who had nearly torn their family apart, and saw not an enemy, but a lonely aunt who had mistaken control for caring. "Mrs. Brennan," she said gently, "these children could use another person who loves them, not instead of us, but along with us." Outside the courthouse, Jacob stood in the cold December air, praying to a God he sometimes doubted, and hoping that love would prove stronger than law, that truth would triumph over tradition, and that the family he'd never expected to find would be allowed to stay together. The next 30 minutes would determine whether the children calling Catherine Mama would have the right to keep doing so for the rest of their lives. When court resumed, Judge Harrison's expression revealed nothing as he settled behind his bench and arranged his papers with deliberate care. The packed courtroom held its breath while Jacob reached for Catherine's hand, their fingers intertwining like a lifeline in a storm. After careful consideration of all testimony and evidence, the judge began, his voice carrying the weight of authority. "This court finds that the children's best interests must be our primary concern." Emma gripped Sam's hand so tightly her knuckles went white. Ben held baby Luke closer, whispering soft reassurances the toddler couldn't understand but seemed to feel. "Mrs. Brennan's offer is generous," Judge Harrison continued, "and her desire to provide for her nieces and nephews is commendable. However, the children themselves have made their wishes abundantly clear." Adelaide sat straighter in her chair, her face pale but resigned. She'd spent the recess talking quietly with her lawyer, and Catherine had seen the exact moment when the older woman's determination crumbled into acceptance. These children have demonstrated remarkable maturity in expressing their desire to remain with their father. Their bonds of affection and trust are evident, and their recovery from recent illness under Miss Mills' care speaks to the stability of their current situation. Catherine's heart hammered against her ribs as she waited for the words that would either save or shatter their family. Therefore, this court awards permanent custody of Emma, Samuel, Benjamin, and Luke Hartwell to their father, Jacob Hartwell. The courtroom erupted in murmurs of approval and scattered applause. Emma burst into tears of relief, while Sam tried to maintain his composure but failed completely. Ben grinned widely, and baby Luke clapped his hands without understanding why everyone was suddenly happy. "However," Judge Harrison said, his voice cutting through the celebration, "this court has concerns about the long-term stability of the household arrangement." Catherine's moment of joy turned to ice in her veins. Had they won only to face new conditions that might tear them apart anyway? "Mr. Hartwell, while your love for your children is evident and admirable, they require consistent female guidance and influence. The court recognizes Miss Mills' dedication and competence, but her current position lacks the legal standing necessary for permanent family stability." Jacob's mind raced as he tried to understand what the judge was suggesting. Beside him, Catherine sat perfectly still, afraid to breathe. "Therefore," Judge Harrison continued, a slight smile touching his stern features, "this court strongly recommends that Mr. Hartwell and Miss Mills formalize their family arrangement through marriage, providing these children with the stable, two-parent household they deserve." The courtroom fell silent as the weight of the judge's words sank in. Jacob turned to look at Catherine, his eyes full of questions he'd been afraid to ask and hopes he'd barely dared to dream. "Miss Mills," Judge Harrison said directly, "Mr. Hartwell appears to require your answer to an unspoken question. What do you say?" Catherine looked at Jacob's beloved face, then at the 4 children who had stolen her heart completely. She thought about the woman who'd ridden up to this ranch 5 months ago, desperate for work and purpose. She thought about the family she'd lost and the family she'd found, about the love that had grown from duty and the hope that had bloomed from ashes. "Yes," she said, her voice clear and strong. "Yes, I'll marry him. Yes, I'll be their mother. Yes, to all of it." Emma launched herself from her seat, followed immediately by her brothers. They surrounded Catherine and Jacob in a tangle of arms and tears and laughter, while the courtroom dissolved into chaos around them. Judge Harrison banged his gavel with unusual enthusiasm. "This court declares the custody matter resolved. Mr. Hartwell, I suggest you make the necessary arrangements quickly. Congratulations to you all." As the crowd began to disperse, Adelaide approached the celebrating family with hesitant steps. "Jacob," she said quietly, "might I speak with you and Miss Mills privately?" They stepped into a quiet corner of the courthouse, the children staying close but giving the adults space to talk. "I owe you both an enormous apology," Adelaide began, her voice thick with emotion. "I thought I was honoring my sister's memory by trying to give her children what I believed she would have wanted. But I was wrong. Margaret would have wanted them to be loved exactly as they are, exactly where they are." "Mrs. Brennan," Catherine started, "please, call me Adelaide. And please, let me say this." She took a shaky breath. "I've been alone since my husband died 10 years ago. I convinced myself that taking the children would fill that emptiness, but I see now that love isn't about taking, it's about giving." Jacob studied his late wife's sister, seeing past her stern exterior to the lonely woman beneath. "What are you saying, Adelaide?" "I'm saying I'd like to be part of their lives, if you'll have me. Not as a replacement parent, but as an aunt who cares about their welfare. I could visit, perhaps help with their education when they're older, be another person who loves them." Catherine felt an unexpected warmth toward this woman who'd nearly destroyed their happiness. "Adelaide, these children could use another family member who cares about them. And I think you could use a family too. You'd welcome me after what I've put you through?" "Family forgives," Emma said simply, appearing at Catherine's elbow. "That's what Mama Catherine taught us." Adelaide's eyes filled with tears at the easy way Emma claimed Catherine as her mother. "Mama Catherine?" "She's our mama now," Sam explained matter-of-factly. "Papa's going to marry her and make it official, but we already knew she was ours." That evening, they celebrated at the hotel restaurant in Cheyenne, an unlikely group that had somehow become a family. Adelaide joined them, asking careful questions about the children's lives and listening to their stories with growing wonder. "When will the wedding be?" Ben asked, attacking his apple pie with enthusiasm. "Soon," Jacob promised, his hand covering Catherine's on the table. "Very soon." "Can we help plan it?" Emma asked eagerly. "Can Adelaide come?" Sam added, surprising everyone, including himself. Adelaide's eyes brightened. "I'd be honored to attend, if you truly want me there." "We do," Catherine said firmly, "because families come in all shapes and sizes, and ours is about to get a little bigger." As they walked back to their hotel rooms that night, Jacob pulled Catherine aside in the quiet hallway. "Catherine," he said softly, "are you sure about this? Marriage is a big step, and we've been through so much." Catherine reached up to touch his face, seeing the uncertainty in his eyes. "Jacob Hartwell, I came to your ranch looking for work. Instead, I found a home, a family, and a love I never expected to have again. If that's not meant to be, then nothing in this world makes sense." "I love you," he said simply, the words carrying the weight of months of unspoken feeling. "I love you too," she replied. "I love you, and I love those 4 amazing children, and I love the life we're going to build together." Outside their hotel window, snow began to fall softly on the streets of Cheyenne, covering the world in fresh, white promise. Tomorrow they would return to the ranch, to the place where a cook had become a mother and a hired hand had become a wife, where a broken family had healed into something stronger and more beautiful than anyone could have imagined. The battle was over, but the real adventure, the adventure of being a family, was just beginning. The church bells rang out across the Wyoming territory on December 22nd, 1000, 867, as Catherine Mills walked down the aisle of the little white chapel outside Cheyenne, her hand resting on Jacob's arm. She wore her best dress, a deep blue wool that brought out her green eyes, and carried a simple bouquet of winter pine and holly that Emma had helped her gather that morning. "You look beautiful, Mama Catherine," Emma whispered from her place as the youngest bridesmaid, her own dress a cheerful yellow that made her blonde hair shine like spun gold. The chapel was packed with neighbors, ranch hands, and townspeople who had come to witness this unusual love story. Morrison and his wife sat in the front pew, beaming with pride at the family they'd watched heal and grow. Even some of the other ranchers had made the journey, curious about the woman who'd tamed Jacob Hartwell's wild household. "Do you, Jacob Thomas Hartwell, take Catherine Elizabeth Mills to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold, in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, for better or worse, as long as you both shall live?" "I do," Jacob said, his voice steady and sure, his eyes never leaving Catherine's face. "And do you, Catherine Elizabeth Mills, take Jacob Thomas Hartwell to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold, in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, for better or worse, as long as you both shall live?" Catherine looked at Jacob, then at the 4 children standing beside them as witnesses, Sam tall and proud at 14, Ben grinning with excitement, Emma clutching baby Luke's hand to keep him from wandering during the ceremony. "I do," she said, her voice carrying clearly through the small church. "Then by the power vested in me by the territory of Wyoming, I now pronounce you husband and wife. Jacob, you may kiss your bride." Jacob's kiss was gentle but full of promise, and when they broke apart, baby Luke clapped his hands and shouted, "Mama! Papa!" much to the delight of the congregation. The reception was held at the ranch, transformed for the occasion with lanterns strung between the fence posts and tables set up in the main barn. The ranch hands provided music with fiddles and harmonicas, while the neighboring women had contributed enough food to feed half the territory. "I never thought I'd see Jacob Hartwell married again," commented Mrs. Henderson from town, watching as Catherine danced with each of the children in turn. "But that woman has worked a miracle with those young ones." "More than that," added Dr. Morrison. "She's worked a miracle with Jacob too. Haven't seen him smile this much since before Mary got sick." Adelaide stood near the refreshment table, looking somewhat out of place in her fine Boston dress among the ranchers and their families, but her face was soft as she watched her nieces and nephews celebrate. "Having second thoughts?" Catherine asked, appearing beside her with 2 cups of punch. "Quite the opposite," Adelaide replied, accepting the cup gratefully. "I'm wondering how I could have been so blind to what these children truly needed. Look at them. They're glowing with happiness." Emma was teaching some of the younger children a simple dance, her natural leadership shining as she patiently showed them the steps. Sam was deep in conversation with 2 older boys about horses and cattle, no longer the angry, confused child who'd gotten into fights just months ago. Ben was helping serve food, his practical nature making him indispensable to the women organizing the meal. "They're good children," Catherine said. "They just needed someone to believe in them." "And you needed them too, didn't you?" Adelaide observed. "This wasn't just about them finding a mother. This was about you finding your purpose again." Catherine considered this, watching Jacob lift baby Luke onto his shoulders so the toddler could see the musicians better. "I suppose it was. I came here looking for work, but I found something much more valuable." "What's that?" "A second chance at the life I thought I'd lost forever." Later that evening, after the guests had gone home and the children were tucked into bed, Catherine and Jacob sat on the front porch swing, wrapped in a quilt against the December cold. The stars were brilliant in the clear winter sky, and the ranch was peaceful around them. "How does it feel to be Mrs. Hartwell?" Jacob asked, his arm tightening around his new wife. "It feels like coming home," Catherine replied honestly. "Like I've been wandering for years and finally found where I belong." "Any regrets about giving up your independence for a ready-made family?" Catherine laughed softly. "Jacob, I gave up loneliness for love, isolation for connection, and emptiness for purpose. Those aren't sacrifices, they're gifts." From inside the house came the sound of little feet on the wooden floor, and Emma appeared in the doorway in her nightgown. "I can't sleep," she announced. "It's too exciting, knowing that tomorrow morning Miss Catherine will really be our mama forever." "Come here, sweetheart," Catherine said, making room on the swing. Emma settled between them, snuggling into Catherine's warmth. "Will things be different now that you're really married?" "Some things will be different," Catherine said thoughtfully. "Your papa and I will share a room now, and legally, I'll be your stepmother instead of just someone who takes care of you. But will you still braid my hair every morning?" "Every single morning," Catherine promised. "And will you still help me with my arithmetic?" "Of course." "And will you still sing lullabies when I have bad dreams?" "Always," Catherine said, pressing a kiss to the top of Emma's head. "Then I guess the important things won't change at all," Emma concluded with the wisdom of a 7-year-old who'd learned that love was more important than legal papers. As they sat together in the peaceful darkness, Catherine reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. 6 months ago, she'd been a widow with no prospects, no family, and no hope for the future. Tonight, she was surrounded by more love than she'd ever dreamed possible. "What are you thinking about?" Jacob asked softly. "I'm thinking about how sometimes the best things in life come disguised as ordinary days," Catherine replied. "The day I answered your advertisement seemed like just another job opportunity. I had no idea it was actually the first day of the rest of my life." "Our life," Jacob corrected gently. "Our life," Catherine agreed, the words warming her more than the quilt ever could. From the barn came the soft lowing of cattle settling for the night, and from inside the house, the gentle breathing of 4 children who now slept secure in the knowledge that their family was complete and permanent. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, the daily work of running a ranch, raising children, and building a marriage based on respect and growing love. But tonight, Mrs. Mary Guin WWW. Catherine Hartwell sat on her front porch with her husband and stepdaughter, surrounded by the peace that came from knowing she was exactly where she belonged. The cook had become a wife, the hired help had become a mother, and the stranger had become the heart of a home. And in the end, that transformation had been the greatest recipe of all. Spring came early to the Wyoming Territory in 1868, bringing with it a sense of renewal that seemed to touch every corner of the Broken Arrow Ranch. Catherine Hartwell, she still felt a thrill every time she thought the name stood in her garden, her hands deep in the rich earth as she planted seeds that would feed her family through the coming year. "Mama Catherine, look what I found," Emma called from near the chicken coop, holding up a perfect brown egg. "It's the first one from the new hens Papa bought." "That's wonderful, sweetheart," Catherine replied, straightening to ease the ache in her back. At 31, she was discovering muscles she hadn't known existed, but the work felt good, purposeful, in a way that cleaning other people's houses never had. Sam emerged from the barn, leading one of the horses, his movements confident and sure. At 15 now, he was nearly as tall as his father and had taken on more responsibility around the ranch. The angry, confused boy who'd gotten into fights was gone, replaced by a young man who understood his place in the family and took pride in his contributions. "Papa says the cattle prices are going to be good this year," he announced, patting the horse's neck affectionately. "Mr. Johnson from the next ranch over thinks we might get top dollar for our herd." "That's good news," Catherine said, though her mind was on other things. She'd been feeling odd lately, tired in the mornings, emotional over small things, and strangely sensitive to certain smells. She had her suspicions about what might be causing these symptoms, but she hadn't said anything to Jacob yet. "Ben's helping Papa fix the fence by the north pasture," Sam continued. "He said to tell you dinner will be late tonight because they want to finish before the storm hits." Catherine looked up at the sky, noting the dark clouds gathering on the horizon. Spring storms in Wyoming could be fierce, and she was glad Jacob was taking precautions to secure the ranch. "In that case, why don't you help me finish planting these beans?" she suggested. "Then we can get the younger children inside before the weather turns." As they worked together in companionable silence, Catherine found herself thinking about the changes the past year had brought. Not just the obvious ones, the wedding, the legal adoption papers that made her officially the children's stepmother. The way the community had gradually accepted her as Jacob's wife, but the subtler transformations that came from daily life lived together. Emma had grown more confident, taking on leadership among the neighborhood children and showing a natural gift for teaching younger kids. Ben had discovered a love of reading and spent hours poring over every book they could find, his practical mind fascinated by stories of adventure and exploration. Even baby Luke, now 2 and chattering constantly, had blossomed into a happy, secure toddler who knew exactly where he belonged. "Mama Catherine," Sam said suddenly, using the name that still made her heart skip a beat, "can I ask you something?" "Of course. Do you ever miss your old life? Before you came here, I mean?" Catherine considered the question seriously. "I miss some things," she said honestly. "I miss the husband I lost, and I'll always grieve for the baby who never got to grow up. But I don't miss being lonely, Sam. I don't miss feeling like I had no purpose or no place in the world. And now I wake up every morning knowing exactly why I'm here, and exactly what my job is to love this family and help it thrive. That's a gift, not a burden." Sam nodded thoughtfully. "I'm glad you stayed, even when things got hard with Aunt Adelaide and the court case and everything." "Me too," Catherine said, reaching over to squeeze his shoulder. "Sometimes the best things in life require us to fight for them." That evening, as the storm raged outside, the family gathered in the parlor for their evening routine. Jacob read aloud from a book of adventure stories, while Catherine mended clothes and the children played quietly on the floor. Baby Luke had fallen asleep in Catherine's lap, his thumb in his mouth and his face peaceful. "Jacob," Catherine said during a pause in the reading, "I need to tell you something." Something in her tone made him look up from the book, and the children sensed the importance of the moment, growing still. "What is it?" he asked gently. Catherine looked around at her family, these 4 precious children who'd become hers. This good man who'd given her his heart, this home they'd built together from love and determination. "I'm going to have a baby," she said simply. The silence that followed was profound. Then Emma let out a squeal of delight. Ben grinned widely, and Sam looked stunned but pleased. Jacob's face went through a series of emotions: surprise, joy, wonder, and finally, pure happiness. "Are you sure?" he asked. "Pretty sure," Catherine replied, laughing at his expression. "Dr. Morrison confirmed it this afternoon when I went to town for supplies." "A baby," Emma breathed. "A real baby brother or sister." "When?" Jacob asked, moving to sit beside Catherine on the sofa. "Late fall, near as we can figure. October, maybe November." Jacob reached for her hand, his thumb tracing over her wedding ring. "How do you feel about it?" "Scared," Catherine admitted. "Excited, grateful, terrified, happy, all at the same time. I lost my first baby," she added quietly, wanting the children to understand why this was both wonderful and frightening for her. 3 years ago, with my first husband. So this feels like a second chance I never expected to have." Emma climbed onto the sofa beside them, carefully avoiding baby Luke. "Will you love the new baby more than us?" Catherine's heart clenched at the vulnerability in the question. "Oh, sweetheart, love isn't like a pie that gets smaller when you cut more pieces. Love grows bigger when you add more people to it. This baby will be your brother or sister, and I'll love it just like I love all of you completely and forever." "Will it look like you or like Papa?" Ben asked, his practical mind jumping to details. "We'll have to wait and see," Jacob said, his arm tightening around Catherine. "But it doesn't matter what it looks like. It'll be ours, and that's what counts." As the storm continued outside, they talked about the future, about preparing a nursery, about what names they might choose, about how their family dynamic would change with a new member. The children peppered them with questions, their excitement infectious. Later, after the children were in bed, Catherine and Jacob sat by the fire, talking quietly about their hopes and fears for the baby coming. "Are you worried?" Jacob asked. "About the birth, I mean?" "Some," Catherine admitted, "but I have you now, and the children, and Dr. Morrison. I'm not facing this alone like I did before." "You'll never face anything alone again," Jacob promised. "We're a family, and families stick together through everything." Outside, The storm was beginning to calm, leaving behind the clean, fresh smell of rain and new growth. Inside, the fire crackled peacefully while husband and wife planned for the future they were creating together. Catherine placed her hand on her still flat stomach, marveling at the life growing inside her. This baby would be born into a family that had been forged by choice, strengthened by adversity, and bound together by love that had nothing to do with blood and everything to do with commitment. In the morning, she would tell Adelaide the news, and she knew the older woman would be both delighted and moved to be included in this new chapter. She would help Emma start planning for her role as big sister, guide Sam and Ben through their feelings about the family changing, and begin preparing Luke for the reality of not being the baby anymore. But tonight, she simply sat with Jacob in the peaceful aftermath of the storm, grateful for the unexpected blessing of this second chance at motherhood and the remarkable family that would welcome this new life with open arms and loving hearts. The cry of a newborn baby pierced the October night air in 1868, followed immediately by Catherine's exhausted sob of relief as Dr. Morrison announced, "It's a girl, a healthy, beautiful baby girl." Jacob burst through the bedroom door he'd been pacing behind for the past 12 hours, his face pale with worry that transformed instantly into wonder as he saw Catherine holding their daughter. The baby was tiny and perfect, with a shock of dark hair and lungs that clearly worked magnificently. "She's really here," Catherine whispered, tears streaming down her face as she studied the infant's scrunched features. "She's really ours." "Can we see her?" Emma's voice called from the hallway, where all 4 children had been waiting with barely contained excitement. "Come in, all of you," Jacob said, his voice thick with emotion. "Come meet your sister." The children crowded around the bed with reverent whispers, their eyes wide as they got their first glimpse of the newest member of their family. "She's so small," Ben observed, with his usual practicality. "Are you sure she's finished?" Dr. Morrison chuckled as he packed his medical bag. "She's perfectly finished, Ben, just brand new. Babies are always tiny at first." "What's her name?" Sam asked, reaching out one finger to gently touch the baby's hand. Catherine looked at Jacob, and he nodded encouragingly. They'd discussed names for months, but seeing their daughter had made the decision clear. "Mary Margaret Hartwell," Catherine said softly. "Mary for your first mama, who would have loved her so much, and Margaret because that was your mama's real name too." Emma's eyes filled with tears. "You named her after Mama?" "Part of her," Catherine confirmed. "Because your first mama will always be part of this family, and now she's part of your sister too." 2-year-old Luke pushed closer to get a better look, his chubby fingers reaching toward the baby with curiosity. "Baby sister?" he asked hopefully. "That's right, Luke," Jacob said, lifting his son so he could see better. "This is baby Mary Margaret, and she's going to need all of us to help take care of her." "I can help," Emma declared immediately. "I can help with baths and feeding and teaching her things." "We all can help," Sam added, his voice filled with the responsibility of being the oldest brother. That's what families do. Over the next weeks, the Hartwell household adjusted to life with a baby in ways both wonderful and challenging. Mary Margaret was a good baby. She slept well, ate enthusiastically, and seemed content to be passed from one loving family member to another. But she was still a baby, which meant sleepless nights, constant feedings, and the kind of exhaustion that came from loving someone completely helpless. "She's crying again," Ben announced one evening, appearing in the kitchen where Catherine was trying to prepare dinner while bouncing the fussy infant. "I know, sweetheart. Sometimes babies cry even when everything is fine," Catherine explained, swaying gently to soothe Mary Margaret. "She's just learning how to be in the world." "Here, let me take her," Emma offered, reaching for her sister with the confidence of an 8-year-old who'd appointed herself chief baby helper. "Sometimes she likes it when I sing to her." Catherine gratefully handed over the baby, marveling at how naturally Emma had taken to her role as big sister. The little girl began humming a lullaby their first mother had sung, and Mary Margaret's cries gradually quieted. "You're getting good at that," Jacob observed, coming in from the evening chores to find his kitchen full of his family. "Adelaide's letter came today," Catherine said, nodding toward the table where an envelope waited. "She wants to know if she can visit for Christmas and meet the baby." "What do you think?" Jacob asked. "I think Mary Margaret could use another aunt who loves her," Catherine replied. "And I think Adelaide has learned the difference between wanting to control a family and wanting to be part of one." That evening, after the children were settled and the baby was sleeping peacefully in her cradle, Catherine and Jacob sat by the fire discussing the changes the past year had brought to their lives. "Sometimes I can't believe this is real," Catherine admitted, watching the flames dance in the fireplace. "A year ago, I was just your hired cook. Now I'm a wife and mother to 5 children." "Do you ever feel overwhelmed?" Jacob asked. "It's a lot of responsibility." "Every day," Catherine said honestly, "but overwhelmed in a good way. Like when you look at a sunset that's so beautiful it makes your chest hurt because you can't hold all that beauty inside you." From the nursery came the soft sound of Mary Margaret stirring, and Catherine started to rise, but Jacob gently pushed her back down. "I'll get her," he said. "You rest." Catherine watched her husband disappear into the nursery and listened to his quiet voice as he soothed their daughter. Through the walls, she could hear the older children settling into sleep, Emma whispering prayers that now included her baby sister, Sam and Ben discussing plans for the next day's work, and Luke talking to his stuffed horse in the rambling way of toddlers. This house, which had once echoed with grief and chaos, now hummed with the peaceful rhythms of a family that had learned to love deeply and trust completely. They'd been tested by illness, legal challenges, and the fears that came with blending lives together, but each trial had only made them stronger. When Jacob returned with Mary Margaret, who was wide awake and looking around with the alert curiosity of a baby discovering the world, Catherine held out her arms to receive her daughter. "What's she thinking about, do you suppose?" Jacob asked, settling beside them on the sofa. "Everything," Catherine replied, studying Mary Margaret's serious expression. "She's thinking about how many people love her, and how safe she is, and how lucky she is to be born into a family that knows how precious she is. Think she'll remember any of this when she grows up? Maybe not the details," Catherine said, "but she'll remember the feeling. She'll remember being surrounded by love from her very first breath. That's a gift that lasts a lifetime." As they sat together in the lamplit husband, wife, and baby, Catherine reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. She thought about the scared, grieving children who'd needed someone to believe in them, the lonely widower who'd needed someone to help him hope again, and the broken woman who'd needed a family to heal her heart. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Mary Margaret would need constant care. The older children would need attention and guidance. The ranch would require endless work. And Adelaide's visit would test their new family dynamics in ways they couldn't predict. But tonight, holding her daughter while her husband's arm encircled them both, Catherine knew with absolute certainty that every difficult day, every moment of doubt, and every leap of faith had been worth it to arrive at this perfect moment of peace and love. The cook had become a mother, the hired help had become a wife, and the stranger had become the heart of a home. And now, with Mary Margaret sleeping peacefully in her arms, Catherine understood that the greatest recipe of all wasn't for bread or stew or any dish that could satisfy hunger. The greatest recipe was for love, and it required only 3 ingredients: the courage to risk your heart, the strength to weather storms together, and the wisdom to choose each other again and again. Every single day. 2 years had passed since Mary Margaret's birth, and the Broken Arrow Ranch, in the spring of 1870, bustled with the energy of a family that had grown both in size and in happiness. Catherine stood in the doorway of the expanded kitchen, watching 17-year-old Sam teach 3-year-old Mary Margaret how to feed the chickens while toddler James, their second baby, born just 8 months, aganapped peacefully in his cradle nearby. "Gentle, Mary Maggie," Sam instructed patiently as his little sister scattered corn with enthusiastic abandon. "The chickens don't need that much food all at once." "But they're hungry, Sammy," Mary Margaret protested, her dark curls bouncing as she shook her head emphatically. "Look how they run." Catherine smiled at the scene, her hand resting on her rounded belly where their 3rd child was growing. At 33, She felt like she'd lived several lifetimes, the lonely widow, the desperate woman seeking work, the stepmother learning to love children who weren't born to her, and now the mother of a growing family that filled every corner of their home with laughter and chaos. "Mama Catherine, James is awake!" 10-year-old Emma called from inside the house, her voice carrying the authority of a girl who'd appointed herself chief helper with all the babies. "Coming, sweetheart," Catherine replied, though she paused for another moment to savor the sight of her family scattered across the ranch yard. Ben, now 14, was working with his father to repair the barn roof, their movements synchronized after years of working together. 4-year-old Luke was building elaborate structures with wooden blocks on the porch, his tongue sticking out in concentration. The sound of approaching hoofbeats drew Catherine's attention to the road, where a familiar carriage was making its way toward the house. Adelaide's twice-yearly visits had become treasured family events, and this spring visit was particularly special because she was bringing news that would change all their lives. "Aunt Adelaide's here," Emma announced, bursting through the kitchen door with baby James in her arms. "I saw her carriage coming up the road." Within minutes, the entire family had gathered in the front yard to welcome their visitor. Adelaide stepped down from her carriage with the help of her driver, her Boston elegance somehow perfectly at home now in the rough beauty of the Wyoming territory. "My dears," she said, embracing each family member in turn, "how wonderful you all look. And Mary Margaret, you've grown so much since Christmas." "I can count to 20 now," Mary Margaret announced proudly. "And I can help Mama Catherine with baby James?" "Can you indeed? What a helpful big sister you are." After Adelaide had been settled in the guest room and they'd all gathered for lunch, she made her announcement with the kind of excitement that suggested she'd been bursting to share her news. "I've made a decision," she said, looking around the table at the faces that had become so dear to her. "I'm moving to Cheyenne permanently." The table erupted in surprised exclamations and delighted chatter. Catherine felt her heart leap with joy. Having Adelaide nearby would mean the children could know their aunt properly, and Catherine had grown genuinely fond of the woman who'd once tried to tear their family apart. "What changed your mind?" Jacob asked. "Several things," Adelaide replied thoughtfully. "First, my health isn't what it once was, and the doctors think the Wyoming air might be good for me. Second, I'm tired of being lonely in that big house in Boston. But mostly," she paused to look at each face around the table, "I want to be part of this family's daily life, not just a visitor who appears twice a year." "What about your house in Boston?" Catherine asked. "Sold," Adelaide said with satisfaction. "I've purchased a lovely home in Cheyenne, and I plan to open a small school for young ladies. Emma, when you're ready, I'd like you to be one of my first students." Emma's eyes went wide. "Really? I could learn things like fancy writing and music? And mathematics and literature and all sorts of useful skills," Adelaide confirmed. "But you'd come home every evening to your family where you belong." Sam looked thoughtful. "What about the rest of us? What could we learn?" "Whatever interests you most," Adelaide replied. "I believe education should serve the student, not the other way around. If you want to learn about business and ranching, we'll find ways to make that happen. If Ben wants to study engineering or Luke wants to learn about animals, we'll find teachers for those subjects too." Catherine felt tears prick her eyes as she listened to Adelaide outline her plans. This was the woman who'd once believed that taking the children away from their home was what was best for them. Now she was finding ways to enrich their lives while keeping them exactly where they belonged. "There's something else," Adelaide continued, her voice growing softer. "I want to help you build a proper school here on the ranch. Not just for your children, but for all the children in the area. This territory is growing, and these young people deserve better educational opportunities than they currently have." Jacob and Catherine exchanged glances, both thinking of the same thing: the neighbors' children who had to travel hours to the nearest school or went without formal education entirely. "That's a wonderful idea," Catherine said. "We could use the old barn if we fixed it up properly. Or build something new," Jacob added, his mind already working on the possibilities. "We've got the land, and with cattle prices staying good, we've got the resources." That evening, after Adelaide had been properly welcomed and the children had extracted promises of stories and presents, Catherine found herself alone with her sister-in-law on the front porch. The sun was setting over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink that never failed to take her breath away. "Adelaide," Catherine said quietly, "I want to thank you." "For what?" "For becoming the person these children needed you to be. For learning to love them where they are, instead of trying to change them into what you thought they should be." Adelaide was quiet for a long moment, watching Mary Margaret chase fireflies in the yard, while Sam kept a careful eye on her. "I was so wrong," she said finally. "When I first came here, I was thinking about what I wanted, what would make me feel useful and needed. I wasn't thinking about what would actually make the children happy." "But you learned," Catherine pointed out. "That's what matters." "You taught me," Adelaide replied. "You and Jacob both. You showed me that love isn't about control or possession. It's about service, about putting someone else's needs before your own desires." "The children taught us all that," Catherine said. "They taught me that being a mother isn't about giving birth to someone. It's about choosing to love them every single day, no matter what." From inside the house came the sound of baby James crying, followed by Emma's voice offering to help. A moment later, Luke's delighted laughter rang out as Ben chased him around the furniture. The sounds of family life, Catherine thought, messy and loud, and absolutely perfect. "Catherine," Adelaide said suddenly, "are you happy? Truly happy?" Catherine looked out at her family, scattered across the ranch, her husband teaching Sam to repair a saddle, her children playing in the golden evening light, her babies safe and healthy inside the house. She thought about the woman who'd ridden up to this ranch nearly 3 years ago, desperate for work and purpose. "I'm more than happy," she said finally. "I'm complete. For the first time in my life, I know exactly who I'm supposed to be, and exactly where I'm supposed to be." "And where is that?" Catherine smiled, placing her hand on her growing belly, where their third child was stirring gently. "Right here, with this family, building something beautiful out of love and choice and the determination to stick together no matter what." As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Catherine reflected on the lesson she'd learned from her unlikely family. That worth wasn't determined by society's judgment or even by the circumstances of your birth, but by the courage to love deeply, the strength to endure hardship, and the wisdom to recognize that the most precious things in life, family, home, belonging, were not inherited but earned, one faithful day at a time. The cook had become a mother, the hired help had become a wife, and the stranger had become the cornerstone of a family that would continue to grow and flourish for generations to come. And in the end, that was the greatest recipe of all.